welcome to another episode of Cram, Sesh on Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey.
And I'm Reena. Hi, this is our the end of our Cram Sesh Spider-Man week, but not the end of our Spider-Man week entirely.
Penultimate episode of the week, final Cram Sesh. Yes.
Yep.
We are here to go over the MCU Spider-Man movies and also bits and parts from the other movies as well. And we'll kind of go in the exact order of those as well. We going back to the beginning of Spider-Man coming into the MCU, we talked a little bit about it with like the other entries of what we've been doing. But I remember exactly where I was. This is like my JFK moment. Like, I know where I was when they announced that Spider-Man was actually coming to the MCU. I was in Virginia at my brother's house. It was when there was a snowstorm down there, and we got stuck there for an extra 2 days. It snowed less than an inch, but it's Virginia. They don't have snowplows. So our flights were canceled, and we couldn't get back to Boston for 2 days. But yeah, it was super cool to like have sort of this memorable experience behind this thing that was happening that we've all, as much we can like the other movies, whatever, but we've all wanted this kind of thing to happen for a long time.
Yeah, I was. I can't remember last week. Let alone where I was when they announced Spider-Man into the MCU. Although I do remember kind of being bummed for Andrew Garfield, like just a little bit. I mean, like, this is kind of fresh. Like, there's another reboot, and so like I had a little apprehension for that.
But we also we liked
adding
him in the role too. Like if it was a person who we thought wasn't doing a great job, whatever. But like we thought, as much as the second movie wasn't that great, he himself did a good job. So yeah, and Emma Stone.
I do remember being really excited that Sony and Marvel came to an agreement, and that Spider-Man was going to be able to be in movies and then see what was going to happen with his own movies. Because I can't remember if when the announcement happened, if we were just talking about adding Spider-Man to the MCU, or if they had the solo films lined up at that time.
So I don't recall if they announced it ahead of time.
Yeah.
All we knew was that he was coming to the MCU and that it was probably going to be in Captain America Civil War, because that was going to be a, Avengers light kind of team up movie. So it was one of those things where it was, we knew where he was coming in. We didn't know many details outside of like probably that thing, because I can't remember if it was confirmed for sure or not.
Actually, a perfect choice, since in the comics, in Civil War, Spider-Man plays such a big role. Doing any kind of Civil War storyline without him would just not feel right.
Kind of. I think they could have gotten away. I think this is a good introduction for Spider-Man. I think they could have gotten away with that movie not having Spider-Man, and it would have been fine. Because it was just, they added him into a fight scene that was already full of people. So I think it still could have been fine. But I appreciate that that's how we got him. But let's just start there then. The entry into Civil War, I think, is a fun way to introduce Peter, showing not even just the fight, but like the preamble to the fight when Tony goes to Queens and he's talking with Aunt May and stuff. I think it's a good way to show, like, good and quick way to show, like, this is Peter Parker. He's good with gadgets and he seems to be a smart kid. Go. I think that's
way younger. Like, even though all these iterations of Spider-Man have been in high school, TomHolland in this role feels the most like an actual teenager.
Well, and he was also younger than the other actors when they started too. Yeah, by like, but like 5 years.
A little more awkward, a little more unsure of himself, contrary to like, both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield were a little more sure of themselves in the role, and then repeatedly referring to Tony as Mr. Stark, and like that whole dynamic.
They play him more childlike than like, I would say the other two play as 18 years old from the start,
Mhm.
kind of. But yeah.
Yeah. And he is a little bit younger because I feel like at least Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was graduating. He was headed to college pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that I feel like there's weird time things with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man. For some reason, like, in my head, it starts in his junior year, and then it, like, by the time they graduate, like, that all just gets kind of crammed together. So
Mhm.
in my head, it's more like junior year and senior year. It just, they don't convey it well. Um, Whereas
But
with
take
Andrew, like, it shows that it is like a 2 year thing. And then, yeah.
But I think with like playing Spider-Man younger, I think it makes for a really great dynamic with Iron Man and like bringing him in, like kind of taking him under his wing. Because like it also kind of explains why a teenager is involved, like in any of this.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, it is a little iffy and weird to be like, okay, so there's this Sokovia Accord where all heroes are supposed to sign a declaration of who they are, and you just brought on a teenager who wears a full mask, doesn't even show his face, and then is so there's a little bit of like wishy-washiness with the rules there, but
Hmm.
but other than that, yeah, like the mentor aspect for this version of Spider-Man, I think that it makes total sense for how they're going about it. Um, but yeah, I think we can probably rush through Civil War a little bit. So it's like the quips I think are better than Toby's and a little weaker than Andrew's. But just in general, the airport scene is super fun. The underoos, the
Hmm.
like ripping away Cap Shield, the where you from Queens, Brooklyn thing. I think all of that works super super well for the way that they introduced him for this version.
Hmm. Agreed.
Cool. Okay, so now one of the longer form things. Homecoming. Homecoming is still my favorite Spider-Man movie to date, even though I don't think it works the same as like what we think of for a Spider-Man movie. I said this in the Amazing Spider-Man episode that we recorded. It's a little unfair, the advantage that these Spider-Man movies have over the other Spider-Man movies to like get you into it.
Hmm.
Because you have to buy into just Spider-Man and the other stuff. Whereas this, you're just like, the whole world is already built. It was built for almost 10 years at that point. So, unfair advantage, but it is still, at the end of the day, uh, my favorite live action Spider-Man movie. Spider-Verse is still leaps and bounds above pretty much everything else. But yeah, for the live action stuff, I think it's made its way there easily.
This Spider-Man is a lot more relatable and approachable, and I like that they gave him friends. Think that
Yes.
is like pretty key. He's not this like, he's kind of a nerdy kid, but he's not this like weird loner loser that like no one talks to. He's bullied a little bit, but
But
like
even his
not.
bully is a nerd.
Yeah,
Like
he's
like
a
even his bully is on the knowledge team. I
yeah.
forget what it's called exactly off the top of my
And
head,
I
but yeah.
like the Scooby Gang like
Yeah.
guy in the chair like aspect of it. I think that kind of like grounds him, gives him someone to talk about being Spider-Man with, and you get more of how he feels about it because otherwise it's just all in his head. So like as he has conversations with Ned, we kind of understand like what he's going through a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we kind of I almost want to say Marvel kind of got or took a note from like the DC TV shows a little bit because that's sort of the setup of every single one of those shows. They all have a support system and they
Mhm.
all have a person in the chair, at least one. So yeah, I think that's something, especially with the fact that they were going for like a teen comedy outside of the action sequences, like a teen comedy feeling thing, John Hughesy kind of aspect, that they were like, you know what, they do that pretty well. Let's do something in that vein while making it our own. Yeah.
For
Um.
sure. I
Something else
mean,
that's so sorry, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead. I was gonna switch to villains, but go ahead.
Okay, before we even get to that, I just wanted to say like there's something in this movie that most MCU movies don't really do, um, which is needle drops for the soundtrack. Um, like Guardians, we get songs that are pop songs, whatever, but they're in universe and there's a plot reason. Like even in Winter Soldier, like you get references to songs and stuff, but they're in universe. He's being told to listen to those songs because he missed out on them. But in this, it's just a song happening in the background of a scene. Like it's just like the Ramones is just playing and whatever. And I think that's actually really good to push forward the like teen comedy kind of thing. Because it is one of the like this feels a little more like a Sony movie than an MCU movie in a way because of that. And I just think it's good to differentiate it a little bit with everything that's tied in, but like making it feel a little bit on its own as well.
You just reminded me of another thing is that I love the way it started with Peter's perspective on Civil War.
Yeah,
That
the
was like
video
so
that he
good.
records is so good. And just the
I
way
just
that it
I
like
just stole Cap's shield. I just took his shield. Like that like
he's
this
big
just
now.
it's
I gotta
exciting.
go. Like that's the and then like the way that it kind of ends too. Like not even when they're in the car after it ends, when they're back in the hotel room and he's just very quickly going over all the things that were going on. And then he hears the knock at the door and he does like the very easy backflip over. It's just like it fits. It fits really well with like what today's Spider-Man would be doing if he was a teenager. Um,
I
but
love
yeah,
his check-ins with Happy too. Like, here's my daily
that's
report.
I really appreciate that because it is that thing where when you're a kid and you're just trying to like find your way and find your footing and just you feel like nobody's listening to you despite the fact that you know what you're talking about and you're ready to go. um I think they did a really good job of showing us right away that like that's sort of the mind frame for where Peter is right now. He's feeling like he's good to go and he wants to prove himself, but nobody's letting him prove himself. And it goes through the whole movie where like even when they're on the trip in DC and he's like standing on the bed and he's like everybody treats me like a kid. Um yeah, so I really like the way that they handled that.
Like that the adults kind of took responsibility. I feel like in the other films, all of this pressure and all of the weight of these other people's choices seem to fall on Spider-Man. And in this case, Tony takes a lot of responsibility for like what's going on, even though it was Peter who didn't listen. And it was nice to see Spider-Man actually, yes, he is a superhero. Yes, like he is super smart. He's great, but he also is still a kid. And I feel like the other films just like, hey, have some trauma, you can deal with it, just go on. And like, I feel like in this case, it was nice to have that sort of mentor to kind of bring him up to that level.
Yes and no, because I think it's detrimental at a point because there's the scene after the whole ferry scene
Mhm.
where they're talking to one another when Peter says like, "Oh, you're not even here," and he walks out of the suit. It's Peter is very frustrated in that moment, and he does say like, "I've been trying to tell you this, and you did not pay attention," and that's totally true. Like while Tony is taking responsibility and he wants Peter to stay out of stuff, he's still like ignoring the important aspects of Peter still going and doing these things. So it's
Mhm.
sort of it's this weird like yeah, Peter shouldn't be doing that, but also Tony did fuck up. And then he reprimands Peter for actually doing the right thing in the long run. And it's this interesting thing where like that yeah, that's what happens. That's what it's like to be a teenager. Like you could do a bunch of stuff right, but like if it's not what the adult says you should be doing, you're still in the wrong, so punishment. Like so I do appreciate that they showed that sort of on both sides as well. But yeah.
Because also Tony doesn't know what he's doing. He's not like
Yeah,
like
he thinks he's doing the right thing. Yeah.
All he would have had to do is be like, "Hey, we got your report. We've called in the
That's
FBI."
all it is.
That's
It
all it
always boils
is.
every problem that comes up between characters in this movie, like this movie and a lot of movies, it's just like, dude, you could just say like, "Yep, got the message. I got your email. Don't worry about it."
But you know what? Like, I definitely like have parents like that where it's like, well, why didn't you call? I'm like, dude, the phone works. Like, you could have called me.
Yeah.
It's always on me. So like, I get that, but yeah, and it's like this is Tony's like first foray really into responsibility because otherwise he's pretty much responsible for himself, and this
Yeah.
is the first time he's like kind of almost directly responsible for another person because he brought him in. Like that's
Yeah.
on him.
Yeah, and in that same speech moment, it's he says just that. He's like, "Listen, if people died, that's on you. If you died, that's on me." And he is showing that like he thinks he's doing the right thing when he's half doing the right thing, which I think is like a
Tony in a
natural
nutshell.
a natural state for his progression as a character, where he's like, because soon after this we do see that he has a kid now, like so
And like Iron Man 1 or 2 would have never.
no, and I think there's a lot of Iron Man 3 in this movie. Like he straight up says the if you're nothing without the suit, you don't deserve it. Like that whole thing is in relation to Iron Man 3. Like yeah, it is sort of like the undertone of 1 and 2, but like that is the core, the crux of Tony's journey in Iron Man 3, and big reason why I think that movie is better than a lot of people give it credit for. Also, it's set at Christmas right now. We should be watching it right now. But I'm also getting those same vibes out of Hawkeye, and I'm fine with that too. So, which we will be covering when it ends. We're not going to do the multiple episodes thing anymore. It's just a little too much. But yeah, I sidetracked. Back to this. I slept very few hours last night.
It's
and
all New York, buddy. It's all the same.
You wanted to bring up Vulture a little while ago, so why don't we go into that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I love the setup of like the aftermath of the first Avengers film when New York is kind of in shambles. I love Michael Keaton in this film. He is such a good villain.
Yeah.
And like I get his point. Like when the contracts were taken away from them, like kind of going underground. And it was nice to see a villain who initially didn't want to be flashy, wants to fly under the radar. Like wants to just kind of run their criminal
So
organization. But like that's what they want, right? Like nice pun
Vulture.
for me. But they like he's not looking for like to be out there in glory. He just kind of wants to do his thing and support his family that way.
And his guys' families too. Like yeah. That's
like definitely the blue collar.
Yeah, he straight up goes into that. Yeah, with the well, I think that's not where they were living at the time. I think that's like
came later
as they were like being successful at this, black market weaponry thing. He was able to take care of his family more and more. So because
and that scene in the car on the way to the dance is so good and so tense as he puts together that Peter is Spider-Man and Liz is just completely oblivious and like taking photos and they're like getting ready to go to the dance.
Just found out who the Vulture, like what he looks like in real life, like without the mask on. So it's all like it's an unmasking for both of them at the same time, which is fantastic. Just the way that worked out, because usually it's like one person finds out and then the other finds out like later on. Like,
it always seems to be the other person finds out who's Spider-Man before Spider-Man finds out, like, where I feel like it's always that big reveal.
Well, that's sort of the way, because the danger of Spider-Man, or his perception of danger, like his worst fear is somebody finding out who he is and going after his family. And they play into that with this. But that's like, typically, I think that's why they lean into that so much, because it is such a core tenet of the character. But yeah, they just play it so well in this, like the red light changing to the green light as he like as it hits him, like played so well.
That and the choice, he's like, you saved my daughter, like I owe you for that, So
Yeah.
and gives him the opportunity to just walk away. And in that moment, I feel like that character, if he walked away and the show was like, "Yep, that's a good idea," he would not have bothered him again.
Yeah.
Like
He
he'd
would
be
he
like,
would have
"That."
he is a guy that as much as he's a bad guy, he like sticks to his word. Like
Mhm.
that's just how it is. But like the other thing I like about that scene is the actual prop that they use. Like he just has a handgun. He doesn't have one of the fancy whatever weapons. He's just like, "No, look. If you fuck with me, I'm going to kill people with like it hits harder that it's just like a real life weapon to me than
Mhm.
some alien tech whatever. Like it just becomes more real. So that's just another one of those like subtle choices that works really well for this movie.
But you also get the idea that like he's definitely living this weird double life where his family like loves him. Like he's dad of the year. Like he's
Yeah,
great. Like he is great to his daughter. His wife loves him. Like everything is good. But then we know him as a villain.
yeah, and that's the secret identity thing played well. Whereas like the original Spider-Man with Green Goblin, yeah, okay, like
Like Norman Osborn's a
somebody
dick. Like he just
somebody would have
is.
noticed something at some point.
Oh, because he
Um,
doesn't look like him. Like Willem Dafoe doesn't look like the Goblin at all. We
right.
never would have guessed.
Yeah,
And he wasn't like an
they didn't mold the
asshole.
mask from his own face or anything.
But
Um,
he also was like a dick. Like if you're like, oh well, he's a villain, he's kind of a dick anyway. So like that's not that far off.
yeah, well, on top of that too, it's just like if he's passing out and like waking up on the floor, like they'd get him checked out at a doctor, like, and then somebody would be like, "Hey, yo, what's up with this green blood, basically that you have?" But yeah,
And then like with Doc Ock, we knew because there was an accident,
and that
and
was just open,
yeah,
yeah,
that was just like a thing.
and then Spider-Man 3, they didn't bother with it either, the secret identity of the
Yeah,
villains or whatever. So yeah,
but they meant that they both had people that they loved at stake. That is why that
exactly,
scene
yeah,
was so tense.
yeah, and it's a bummer that we're probably not going to get more Liz Allen stuff because she is in the comics very important to the longevity of the character and like other villains. There's granted, we basically got Molten Man in the follow-up movie to this, but even though it wasn't like a real Molten Man, but like that's her brother. Like there's a lot of stuff that's like directly tied to her, which is super cool stuff that's unfortunately not really, I don't see them exploring it anyway, because as far as we know, she doesn't even have a brother in this reality. But
Move away. So if they ever did want to open that door, it's not that hard to open.
yeah, and it's also granted like it's I don't, if I recall correctly, it's not her biological brother, so it could be a second family kind of thing. But yeah, um it's just cool like that they used these characters. Like Ned is a character in the comics. Like he's a little more ganky in this. He's not quite Ned from the comics, but like still cool to like just get these tangential characters that we've never really seen before outside of like Amazing Spider-Man 2 like name drops a ton of characters to the extent where it's like even if they were continuing those series, there's no way that we would see the fruition of all of them. Like if they're doing the Sinister Six, there's no way we're actually going to get Smythe doing like the Spider Slayers and stuff. So, yeah, so it's just cool to get that side of things with that friend group that we said earlier.
I think speaking of the friend group though, I think one of the biggest changes that we saw was with MJ, where MJ isn't this like bombshell girl next door. Like she is like one of the gang. She's their friend. Like she's also quirky and weird like them and super smart. But it was like
I would say from the most popular version, yes, but like this is a little more like Ultimate Spider-Man with her. Like it leans a little more into that. So it's not completely out of nowhere, but it is compared to like the other movies and the cartoon and stuff like that, the more kind of like in your face versions of MJ that we've had. Yeah, it's super different and refreshing, frankly.
well, we'll get into it in Far From Home, but like they're just how awkward the two of them are, because high school's awkward and
Yeah.
liking somebody is awkward. And like a lot of times they always act like everybody has it all together, and they're just, hey, do you want to go out? And like they go, oh my god, I couldn't believe you didn't ask me sooner. And it's like people aren't like that. You gotta like work it up.
But then there's like, to go back to the Vulture stuff real quick, and not so much the Vulture stuff, but just sort of the core of this version of Spider-Man that they go with is in the final like fight, there's about to be a moment where we've seen villains die by their own blade. We've seen villains sort of redeem themselves in a moment, whatever. This is really the first time that we see Spider-Man save a villain.
Mm.
Because as the wings are about to explode, he's yelling out like, you got to stop. It's going to blow up. You're going to die. Liz is going to not have a father. Like he's trying to get that across to him, and he's kind of blinded by the desperation aspect at that point. Even though he's living comfortably at this point. But yeah, it's interesting to see that aspect of Peter, and I think that's going to play heavily into No Way Home, where my idea is that like Doctor Strange is going to say he has to send the villains back to their universe, but they all die facing Spider-Man. And this version of Peter doesn't accept that and like needs to find a way to save everybody. And then like in the trailer, he straight up says like, I don't think I can save everybody. And I think that's about the villains. Like, so I think that's going to play heavily into that. And I think it's a really good sort of the Batman I take no lives thing for this version of Peter. He's like, I need to save everybody, which is, untenable, but I think a good position for this Spider-Man, especially since he's such a young kid and he just wants to make sure everybody's good. Like it's just such a good way to do it.
Like going back to the Vulture again, like that now that's Liz's dad.
Yep.
Yes,
he's
he
not
is
seeing
a villain,
Vulture.
But that's Liz's dad. He likes this girl. She's gonna lose her father. He's obviously lost people. That he doesn't want that to happen. And like it just, and even with like Doctor Strange, it's like he always kind of defaults to like, oh, Mr. Strange or Mr. Stark, or like goes to the hyper polite and
we're using our fake names.
Exactly. So it's like that would make sense. Like why he wouldn't be cutthroat and ruthless and just send him back and like wouldn't care. Like we're not there.
Yeah, because
also he's not jaded. He hasn't been doing it that long.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Is like Strange is he's a very neutral character. Like he's not doing it for him. He's doing it for the like. No, the universe has to like just be steady. Whereas Peter is going to ignore what the universe wants to make sure everybody stays alive. Like that's.
You're a teenager. You always have the best ideas. You just know.
Well, and especially when you're like an optimistic and hopeful teenager, like you're going to go out of your way to try to do something that's going to make sure everybody's okay, as opposed to resigning to like, well, fuck, I can't do it. Like, yeah. So.
If Cap was still around, like Peter would probably more align with Cap and how he does things than say like Tony or Doctor Strange. Like this version of Peter, like see a situation go south, gonna try to do the right thing. Like I see a lot of similarities with these portrayals in the MCU of how they approach.
Yeah,
problems.
well, I mean, at this point, Cap is technically still around. He's just off the grid.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just the fact that like
Peter
needed a mentor, and it happened to be the guy who is like the tech guy. So he was like, I like tech. That's cool. I'm going to go. It's awesome. This is unbelievable. Whereas if it happened to have been Captain America, I think like, yeah, he would have gone. I think it just happened to be whoever it went to, he would have gone with.
Oh no, I'm just saying intellectually I feel like he aligns with Tony, but I think morally he aligns with Cap and how he approaches things.
I could do this all day. Absolutely. Yeah. So speaking of Captain America still being around at this point, let's go into Infinity War, where we lose the majority of these characters.
That scene is painful.
Yeah, so even before that though, like I like all the Spider-Man stuff in this. I don't think it's that impactful for the most part. Like he says some funny stuff and he has some cool moments when they're trying to get the gauntlet off of Thanos' hand. But it comes down to when the snap happens and or now officially the blip as of the follow up to this. But yeah, the stuff with this movie is just like he could have been there, he could have not been there for most of the scenes, and it's not that big of a deal. But like just the gut punch of when that actually happens and the fact that the filmmakers wanted to let it linger on him because that is like the emotional core is if Tony cannot lose Tony can lose people. Tony cannot lose him. Like at that's how it is set up from Homecoming when he straight up says like if you die that's on me. And
He knows, and Peter
yeah.
can feel it happening. That is, it's like it's so much worse than we're watching everybody else kind of disintegrate.
Yeah.
But Peter knows what's happening more so than everyone just kind of sort of fades out. But it's like he's trying to hold on, and it just. Yeah. I think that was ad lib too. I think they just let him.
Well,
I think the I don't want to go.
I don't think it was ad libbed. I think
I'm pretty sure it was ad lib.
Well, I think it wasn't in the script, but they came up with it on the day. I don't think he just randomly said it. I think they naturally, because the Russos said like, Tom said he had this idea to try to do this, and so we kind of worked it in and did it that way instead. So it was like ad libbed in the way that it came up naturally on the day, but it wasn't like he wasn't just riffing, so to speak. But yeah, it's somewhere in between.
But that was it's like he was holding on. You just see the particles just start to, and the way that he like hugs Tony Stark, who made a big deal about not hugging in the first movie. Like, I'm not trying to hug you, I'm trying to open the door, and just hanging onto him as he disappears.
Yeah, because it's not even like a hug out of like hugging. It's just like he's just like trying to get to him of like, help me. What do I do? What do I do?
Like, I'm not ready. I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
Yeah, and I think we can kind of like bleed this into Endgame too, because I don't think we're going to spend much time on both of these. But like, then it comes back. Then that hug aspect comes back, because when he actually comes back and they actually get to like see each other close, because when the portals thing happens, it's everybody is there, so it's just like
literally one of my favorite cinematic scenes ever is like the on your left, and then that whole thing, just yeah. I will cry. I watch it on YouTube and I cry.
But once they finally like get to be close to one another and actually see each other face to face, and Peter's like, "Oh my God, you remember this?" and blah blah blah, and Tony just like doesn't even stop him. He just hugs him, and it's just like, whew, that moment in the theaters, I lost it, and it's all. Well, it's funny because like, I almost feel like it's only mildly set up, but the payoff works so well that it just works.
Well, he was mourning him. Like, he had a photo of him at his house. Like, most of Endgame up until the end is the fallout and how the remaining people are dealing with losing everybody and dealing with that massive loss and grief.
Yeah.
That's, that, because at that point they don't think anyone's ever coming back. And when he has like the photo of him, and it was like losing his protege, but like almost like his first kid, like yeah. The first time he was really responsible. And then that also is why he's so protective of Morgan, even more so. Yeah. He's like, oh no, I'm not going through this again.
Yeah. And it's just, on top of that, it just is like that was like heartwarming with how it breaks you, but like Tony's death, like it's crazy
because Peter's right there.
Well, because you see Rhodey first, and Rhodey is just like, hey, like it's we're in the moment right now. It's happening, and I think part of that is the fact that Rhodey is military. He's like, this is part of the job, kind of thing. And then Peter just,
my dog rolled into a BB-8. Sorry.
Right. But Peter as much as we didn't see an Uncle Ben moment in this, he's having a second Uncle Ben moment. And it's absolutely devastating to see that happen. But then you also have the follow-up of Pepper
telling him that he can rest. Oh my god.
It all just that
she knew.
Moment.
She knew this was gonna happen. Like, she knew, and she doesn't want him going out thinking that there was anything else that he could have done.
Yeah. Well, like, also just the way when she comes in too is just like Peter's losing it at that moment, and the way that she sort of just comes in and like hand on the shoulder is a lot. It's a lot to like follow up on with, like, you know, personal stuff that I was going through sort of around this time with like a family member in the hospital and stuff like that. So I felt in that moment. And yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot. I watched all of what we just talked about in one night, and I felt like I ran a marathon afterwards. Going from Civil War through Homecoming through Infinity War to... I didn't watch all of Infinity War and all of Endgame. I just watched the Peter stuff. But like, just watching all of that in one day, it was... By the end of that, I was just wrecked. Because it does hit so hard and like close to home for those parts. So yeah. But we can go on to Far From Home, where he's dealing with that trauma. and dealing
kind of in a post-blip society.
Yeah. Which is I like how they handle this movie being like the Spider-Man solo movies. Like, there can be the emotional what have yous with it, but like the solo movies just have this tone where they make it a very real but comical thing with like the emotional quote unquote montage for Tony Stark. Like, to have just a heads up, your computer was about to fall over. Yeah.
Sorry, my dog's having a moment behind me right now.
But yeah, the way that the solo movies sort of do it with like a realistic humor of like that montage with I Will Always Love You is hilariously accurate to any stupid like student in high school film
like
project.
Right down to the Getty Images like watermark. Some like, of the footage.
Just the like song and over dramatic. Like, I remember my 8th grade, like graduating from 8th grade to go into high school or whatever. And they always did like a photo slideshow of like through the year or whatever. And it was Green Day's The Time of
Your Life. It was like
so ridiculously cliched. And then there was also, I think, a Sarah McLachlan song as well mixed in there.
There's that one. Oh, and then like Vitamin C's Graduation, like that was another one.
We didn't have that. It was an off year for that, because that was because you were a year above me.
I'm a year ahead of you. Yeah.
So yeah, that was not the hit that year for me. So.
I think my 8th grade graduation, they made us sing that song from Rent.
Ooh,
like dark. Seasons of Love. Like, for 8th grade graduation. Anyways, I digress. But yes, that was insanely accurate to the type of tribute that would be made in high school. I love those 2 news reporters, by the way.
Betty Brant, I like that they made her a student in this. I
love her deadpan.
Yeah. Time. Well, I don't know if you've seen it, but they have, for marketing for the new movie, she's like, they're doing Daily Bugle TikTok things, and she's an intern for the Daily Bugle now, and I'm worried that she's gonna become like some crazy right wing.
Oh no.
Yeah. But yeah.
Witch talk.
But yeah, the thing I think they do really well in this movie, and there's some things that I think they don't do that well, like that they play up for the teen comedy aspect that works, but I think it either could have been better or could have been kind of like toned down or whatever. But like the stuff they do really well is the expectations that Peter has on himself, but also that the world is putting on Spider-Man, and dealing with that stress after just coming back to existence, after just losing your mentor, and then just seeing that sort of weigh on him through this whole thing. And that's the whole reason he's like, I'm so excited for this trip because I just want to get away from it. And then just like it comes back together with like the tulip field scene, which is like, maybe it hits me harder than other people, but I feel like that scene is like soul crushing when he doesn't know if it's happy or not.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, wait, you need to tell me something only you would know, like stop right there. And there's like this desperation and like terrified look in his eye that is, I think it for like, because I never really see people talking about it that much, and it just must play to me way more than other people because that is a very intense scene to me. And maybe it's just because it comes after some jokes, like right after some jokes or whatever. But yeah, it's the way that all sort of comes together is very, very well handled and sort of hampered by the teen comedy aspect, which is sort of, you have to continue that because it's in the first one. But you know, I think the first movie found the balance a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, this was not my favorite Spider-Man movie, and also having recently rewatched it in a post-read parentheses Taylor's version era, I have a hard time not hating Jake Gyllenhaal. So I feel like that clouded my opinion of this movie just a tiny bit. But glad he was in a villain role. That made sense to me. But I just
Yeah,
like it was.
I think the disassociation is still that like he did a fucking great job still, and it's like it's devastating. It is devastating when that betrayal comes.
And like Peter doesn't need that shit. Like he just went through, like we were just talking, he just went through all this. He's trying to set healthy boundaries, which Nick Fury knows nothing about respecting, and is trying to.
Well, to be
be
fair,
a
that's not
kid.
Nick Fury. So,
Well,
that's sort of him and Maria Hill in this movie do feel like not the same characters from the other movies, and it's not until the post-credit scene that's why, because it's not actually them.
well, also with you went to space, like I don't know, and like also going to just shoot people. Yeah, it wasn't. But again, I don't feel like Nick Fury does very well with boundaries. Anyway, but you know, he was trying to find this balance this whole movie in his life of being Spider-Man and being Peter Parker, the teenager, trying to like the girl, trying to go after the girl, and losing Tony, like and mourning that. Find someone who feels almost like his next mentor, perhaps, and then to be completely betrayed by him just sucks. Just sucks. Like, and then in the end, oh my god, the end, like with his big fear coming to life for something he didn't even do, and I was like, fuck that guy. Fuck Mysterio.
Well, and that's what's funny too is like when the first trailer came out, I want to say it was like January of 2019. Everyone was like, wow, look how cool Mysterio is, and look, he's gonna be a mentor to Peter. And I was just like, y'all never trust known liar Quentin Beck. Like, there's no way that this doesn't. And I was scrolling through recently, like the other day, and I searched for tweets where I used the word Quentin Beck, and I specifically responded to old pal Clement that I do not believe that was going to stand, like that he was going to be an actual mentor. I think he was going to turn at some point. And then, but on top of that, I said specifically that the elementals were going to be creations of him, like to make him look like a hero. And then that's exactly what wound up happening. So you can't fool me, Sony.
Is there anything worse than being accused of something that you didn't do and then no one believes you?
Yeah, well, that's the thing is
Yeah.
we'll find out. But
I mean, the way it looks like they're setting up No Way Home is that like Spider-Man is a wanted man now for killing
well, it's
Mysterio, even
literally
though
yeah,
that
the
didn't
first
happen.
it's the scenes where you see swinging with MJ are literally like that's where we left off. Like it's that exact moment. So it should be cool to see like it's been 900 years since the last movie, what it feels like, but we're going right into it. And I'm curious to see if, because one of the nice arcs in this movie is the whole like spider sense, the Peter Tingle thing of like the joke
Don't
early
call it
on that like,
Tingle.
and they play it as a joke through like most of the movie, but then it ends up being like the coolest thing at the end of the movie when he actually just does the samurai thing and just like shuts his eyes and goes. Um, so yeah, I'm curious to see how that'll come back into it, but yeah.
I mean, I'm talking a lot of shit about Mysterio, but I did love the design and like how they did it. It was such a contrast to how we've seen some of the other villains who have been very modernized, very techy, and this kind of had like a very classic sci-fi feel, especially with all the green smoke, and they kind of stayed true to that, and it looked very like steampunk.
Well, not I mean just not even in like for that aspect, but just in general that Mysterio is the one of the biggest joke characters in Marvel's sort of repertoire. Like he's a silly, dumb character that like yeah, he can do some cool stuff that can be like intimidating, but like ultimately like he's a special effects guy. Like he's just a guy with a fishbowl on his head. So like
But they made
seeing
it
the
look
way that
cool.
they made him look cool, but they also like made it interesting and meta and like had him wearing a straight up suit that you would wear on a movie set to do motion capture. Like it's the way that they actually handled it was shockingly good almost. Like as good as the Marvel has been with doing all their character adaptations with the MCU, it's still Mysterio. Like there's no reason Mysterio should be like well adapted.
Yeah, I know, but you know that's what they like try to do, and they try to ground. I'm glad that they took for these movies a more comic booky approach to the way his character looked instead of trying to kind of make it more modern day.
More
a modern day fishbowl.
Right, yeah, and just make it a grounded version of like a super villain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I like that it looks like something that came out of like a 60s sci-fi movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, as much as there's now a little bit more of a spotlight on Jake Gyllenhaal, the real person.
Just give her scarf back.
His performance in this movie is fantastic. And it is really hard to actually watch the moment that Peter gives him the glasses. Like it was hard the first time. Like the reveal was just like a gut punch, but watching it back now is just like, no, Peter, no, please. Like this is gonna be bad. Yeah, it's just the way that he plays it, and especially since like the way that Beck is speaking to Peter through this whole movie, he's talking to him on a level that nobody else talks to him. Everybody else talks to him like a kid. And he's talking to him like a fucking like partner or whatever. And it's a little bit more of like when you think of Batman and Robin and you're just like, Batman, stop talking to Robin like an asshole. Don't be a bastard. Like just be cool with Robin, please. That's sort of the vibe that I get from that. Like this is almost like when Dick Grayson became Robin and Damian Wayne was Robin, or became Batman and Damian Wayne was Robin. Like this is more of almost seeing that adapted into a movie than whatever. But like it's just really cool to see a character. I mean, really cool, and then again, gut punch. But like really cool to see a character just treat Peter as an equal as opposed to like talking down to him because he's a young kid. Because even like even the Skrull version of Nick Fury is talking down to him the whole time. So it's like it's a bummer. But yeah.
Well, I feel like he's always interacting with like the biggest egos, like in the MCU too. Like the poor like between Tony and then Doctor Strange. Like he just like can't catch a break with any of our like lighter, like more down to earth characters.
Humbler
it's always
characters.
these, like, these few, like if he was talking to like Bruce, or if he was interacting with Clint. Like these would be people that would talk to him like a normal person.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, he's always with like the most intense individuals in the Marvel universe.
Yeah. So I do think that this is still a better movie than all the other live action Spider-Man movies. But I think a lot of that runs on the shoulders of it being the MCU and having like there's a lot of, you know, build up and contextualizing and stuff as opposed to, you know, Amazing Spider-Man 1 is good, but like it is what it is. This has a lot of surrounding context that like helps elevate it probably more than it even maybe deserves to, but like it's for me it is like, and this is all Spider-Man movies, but it's Spider-Verse and then Homecoming and then this, just because like even though it has those parts where it dips, it never dips so hard that it's bad.
No, it's definitely not a bad movie at all. But I also think it's because we care about this universe, and there are so many more people to care about because Peter is surrounded by like good peeps. Like we care
people
about
that give a shit about him,
right? We don't want anything to happen. We don't want anything to happen to MJ. We don't want anything to happen to Aunt May or
I'm nervous about Aunt May. I'm very nervous about Aunt May. There is an attack on Feast in that trailer, and I'm nervous.
Like Happy, everybody loves Happy,
and then it cuts to Happy looking concerned. I don't like what they're doing. I don't like what they're playing with right now.
Like this kid has dealt with enough. Like, why do we have to traumatize Spider-Man?
Well, that's the thing is like Happy is sort of like the C-3PO kind of character. Like we see the MCU like through his eyes through the years, and early on he's just like a comedic character, like a foil for Tony, kind of. And an
excellent director.
Yes. But we, you know, Happy is sort of like a foil for Tony, and then we see him through the years. And I don't think this line hit me as hard in the theaters as it did the other day when I was rewatching it, but like seeing him sitting outside the house after they have Tony's memorial, and he says, "What do you want to get for food?" And she says, "Hamburgers," and you just see like him tear up. I'm like, fuck. Like, and it's the same thing that happened with C-3PO. Like, even though The Rise of Skywalker isn't that great, like by the end of it, you have that moment, or not by the end of it, like middle of it, you have him say like whatever happens because he's getting his memory erased, like whatever happens, I just want you to know like these friendships meant something. And it's like, shit, man. Like this movie's bad, but that part's really good. But like he sort of is that character. Like he is the like Guildenstern, like the Shakespeare thing. I was like, you see him go through different stories, sort of. But like it's really interesting how this movie leans into those MCU things, but like not in the way that Civil War did. Like it doesn't go like that far into it. It's still his story, which is, for me, being like, I'm wearing this shirt. Like, it's, for me, it's the most important character Marvel has. So I do want to see him interact with all these characters, but on top of that, I just want these good Spider-Man stories, and they've luckily been able to make something that feels completely different from what we've had. but it's still a substantial thing that like I can watch these the way I used to watch Spider-Man 2.
Mm-hmm.
Like it hits that well because it's, you know, all the pieces just come together. The universe contextualized with everything surrounding him. The way that they do work out the like extended family and friends of like the people that know, and like growing and having MJ learn who he is in this means more than even in Spider-Man 2. So yeah, it's just the way that they managed to like balance things out yet still feel new is sort of remarkable.
Like they're just setting up a future where he kind of becomes, so like when all of this started, Iron Man was the main guy. They didn't have access to all of their characters. Like this was a big chance they were taking when they built up the MCU. But now that this has been established, this role is kind of open for him to kind of take that lead character that he kind of already is within the comic book universe,
Yeah.
and like grow around him. There's just so much potential, and now that we're introducing multiverses, I mean, we could get whatever Spider-Man storyline we want, pretty much.
Yeah, well, and then on top of that, like we know he's coming back for 3 more.
Which is great because
So
he was young, so like that makes sense, and we can
yeah,
get
and
lots of
I do
Spider-Man.
eventually want to see an aged up Peter. Like I want to see him, something they're never going to do, but I would love for them to do is to see Peter become a school teacher. Like that's some of my favorite stuff in the comics is him being a teacher.
But
There's
this Peter would be such a good teacher. He would be
yeah,
so good.
and you can turn that into him becoming the mentor. Like for the Young Avengers, he can be like the guy.
Mhm.
And so I do see them sort of working towards that with, you know, they have this next generation of characters coming in and he'll be the one that's been there for a while at that point. So yeah, I'm really excited to see them actually like find a little bit of that in Peter because like that's what we want to see. We want to see him grow. Like he was introduced as this like innocent little fluff ball, and we want to see him become like we see him become the guy in each of these movies, but like structurally speaking, he's on a trajectory that is like this the whole time. So I want to see him before he bows out actually hit that. Like I want to see him, but like even though we're getting that animated series with like the early years of Spider-Man for Disney Plus, I don't want to see Uncle Ben say the responsibility line in that.
Mm-mm.
I want to see the first time he says that is he's talking to the Young Avengers and saying like in a moment where they're desperate that his uncle once told him this thing. And then he gets to say it for the first time in the MCU to the younger generation. Like that would work so well. We'll see if that's, you know, how it goes, but
Although
whatever.
I think we didn't mention that they didn't feel the need to like show Uncle Ben getting killed again. It's just kind of like assumed. They didn't pull the DC Batman classic of seeing Bruce Wayne's parents get murdered over and over
Well,
and over again in every film.
but even the Spider-Man stuff, like we've seen it a lot now. It's obviously there just haven't been as many times as Batman has had to show it, but yeah, we saw it multiple times in the Raimi movies. We saw it, yeah.
No, I mean in this version, like in the MCU,
no,
like they just
right, yeah.
I appreciated that they're like, we already know, like we know
Yeah.
that. And like we know the line. If we're watching, like we know the line. So to your point, if he says it like to the Young Avengers, like we know what that means.
Well, because they even ignored the line directly. Like they have a version of the line in the Amazing Spider-Man, but it's not word for word the line. He just talks about responsibility.
But you don't need to see Uncle Ben die for that line to be poignant. Like, do you know what I mean? For that line to matter.
Yeah, like I will say I'm not going to be mad if we were to see Uncle Ben die again because it is a very cathartic emotional thing for me every time. Like it's
a lot.
Well, no, I mean it's always a very poignant scene. It's not like the Batman shit where they're just like poetic pearls falling on, like it's not poignant anymore because they do the exact same thing every time. But like the way we've seen Uncle Ben go, it's emotional in the first movie. It's devastating in the second movie. Like in The Amazing Spider-Man, it is the better version of that scene. And so I'm not mad at that scene being in the movie because it works. Like if it works for the movie, it works. I don't have to see it though, is the thing. Like you said with this, like we know it, we don't have to see it, but if you do see it and it's done well, I'm still going to be thankful that it's done well. But yeah, I do feel like they won't show that in the animated show because it's an animated show on Disney Plus. But yeah. But yeah.
Into the Spider-Verse 2, aren't we getting a sequel to that too?
Well, we're getting Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. I think we all knew we were getting like a teaser of some kind before this movie comes out, before No Way Home comes out. But the surprise drop was that this is going to be Part 1. We don't actually know how many parts. We can assume 2 because then it would be a trilogy. But like they could technically do it infinitely and just keep adding different versions of it. So yeah, I want to see spiders, man. I want to see the Peter Parker, the Spider-Man who is thousands of spiders who think that they are Peter Parker. Because that is one of the funniest things from the Spider-Verse comics. I love it so much.
I would love if they bring Gwen Stacy as Spider-Gwen like into the MCU because I really like Gwen Stacy as a character and I love Spider-Gwen. And she was great in Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, I do think we see Miles first. I think we eventually see it, but I think we see Miles and maybe Silk even before Spider-Gwen. We want
more Spider people. More Spider people.
But I don't think they're gonna do the comic story for Silk, which involves Peter and her basically smelling each other's pheromones from across the city and like getting it on.
Like, hard time picturing TomHolland getting it on. Actually, you know what? I take it back. If I think about his lip sync battle, as Rihanna, which I would say if we're ranking, that's probably my favorite Spider-Man movie of all time, is TomHolland doing Rihanna for lip sync battle, followed by Homecoming.
Right. But yeah, like it's the MCU. I don't see them going that like sexual. It's a pretty mild universe in terms of that stuff. But I think the most we get out of that is Tony with the reporter, like in the early Iron Man stuff.
They got it on in the Eternals.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
But maybe
but they're robots, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but maybe instead of like sensing pheromones, it's a different application of the Peter tingle.
You made it more intense.
Yeah,
with that.
Just layered. That's a layered comment.
Yeah, but I think we'll end there.
Yeah, there's just so many ways this could go, but yeah, I'm excited for whatever's next.
Yeah, which we will have tomorrow as we finish out Spider-Man week on this here podcast. It's been a lot of stuff, but been fun to revisit all this stuff because even if we didn't, go through these episodes where we revisit them, I still would have probably watched it all anyway. So good to at least get the thoughts out and not just in a Twitter thread. But yeah, we'll be back tomorrow with our review conversation about Spider-Man No Way Home with all of the Spider-Men. Hopefully. Still not technically confirmed, but hopefully. But until then, bye.
Bye.